What happened when a mafia boss stopped his car to ask a waitress one simple question in the rain. By sunrise, an entire empire was already falling apart. This isn't just a story about power money or revenge. It's about the moment a broken woman realizes losing everything may be the first time fate finally looks her in the eye. Picture Chicago after midnight. Cold rain. Neon bleeding across wet pavement. A waitress in a soaked uniform clutching one small bag, walking like she's trying not to shatter in public. No home, no backup, no one coming. Then a black SUV glides beside her, and the kind of man people fear lowers the window and asks, "What happened?" Stay with me because this story goes far deeper than rescue. It's about dignity, secrets, and the price of saying no. If this opening grabs you like the video, and comment where you're watching from. The question stayed with her even after the door shut, and the warmth of the SUV wrapped around her damp skin. For the first few seconds, Emma could only hear three things. Her own breathing, the quiet hum of the engine, rain ticking against the roof in a patient, steady rhythm that sounded almost unreal after the slam of the alley door. She sat on the far edge of the leather seat, shoulders drawn in, canvas bag in her lap, fingers hooked through the strap so tightly they hurt. The man beside her did not crowd her. He did not look at her the way most men looked at a woman alone at night. No hungry smile, no fake concern polished to sound soft. He simply sat there in silence, one hand resting against his knee, gaze turned toward the dark city sliding past the tinted glass. She could feel his presence anyway. Power had a temperature to it. It changed the air. The driver took a corner without a word. Chicago rolled around them in blurred reflections and wet light. Storefronts closed for the night. L tracks slicing across the street overhead. Puddles jumping under the tires. A man in a hood waiting beneath a flickering bus sign. A couple arguing outside a liquor store. The city looked exhausted. So did she. Her sleeves were still wet. The club logo stitched onto her apron felt heavier now, like wearing proof of something humiliating. She moved to untie it. Leave it. His voice was low and even, not sharp, not loud, somehow harder to ignore because of it. Emma stilled and looked over. For the first time since she got in, he turned fully toward her. The light from passing traffic cut across his face in brief flashes, finding the scar through his brow, the clean line of his jaw, the stillness in his eyes. He looked like a man who had been taught early never to waste movement. Why, she asked. "I want to see it." She frowned. "It's just an apron." "No," he said. "Tonight it's evidence." A small chill worked down her spine. She looked away first. Neither of them spoke for a while after that. The silence was not empty. It was measuring. The kind of silence that seemed to gather details and stack them in order. Emma kept staring out the window, but she was aware of him noticing things. The red patch on her knuckles where the back door had scraped her. The water dripping from the hem of her black slacks. The way she flinched every time the driver slowed near an intersection. The cheap canvas bag in her lap. Too small for a life. Too light for 8 months. He waited until the city had quieted around them, until they were stopped at a red light under a pharmacy sign blinking blue against the rain. Then he asked, "How long did you work there?" His tone made it sound less like conversation and more like a statement being placed on the table. 8 months. At Halcyon. Yes. The light changed. The car moved again. What were you hired to do? Wait tables. Cocktail service. Help with private events if it stayed legal and above board. He watched her for a moment, and did it? A humorless breath escaped her. For maybe a week. The corner of his mouth did not move, but she sensed the shift in him. Not surprise. Confirmation. What changed? Emma swallowed and stared at the blur of neon outside. Talking about it meant hearing it back. Hearing it back meant making it real. The club changed after midnight, she said. That was the first thing I noticed. Earlier in the evening it looked like any upscale lounge. Music, drinks, men with too much money trying to look bored, women in dresses that cost more than my rent used to. The bartenders smiled. The hostess stand stayed busy, everything looked expensive and controlled. And after midnight, the regular customers thinned out. The private clients came in. The kind nobody made wait. Men who never gave their real names. Men security recognized without checking IDs. Men who never stood at the bar because they were always walked straight to the back or upstairs. His gaze stayed on her face. You saw that from the start. I saw enough to know I shouldn't ask questions. That answer seemed to satisfy him for a moment. He let it settle. Emma watched the rain race down the glass and thought of the first night she'd climbed the narrow back stairs to her room. She had been tired enough to cry from relief. The room was barely bigger than a storage closet. A twin mattress, a metal lamp, a small dresser with one crooked leg, a window that faced an alley wall painted with old graffiti. But there was a door and a lock, and for the first time in months a place where no one could tell her to leave at dawn. She had touched that lock like it was a prayer. Now it was gone. "Why did you take the job?" he asked. The question pulled her back. "Because I needed one." That isn't an answer. She looked at him then, irritation breaking through her fatigue. "It is when you have bills." His expression did not change. "Try again." For one reckless second, she wanted to tell him to stop. To tell him that a man in a car worth more than most apartments in the city didn't get to ask poor women to explain survival like it was a character study. But something in his face held her back. He was not mocking her, he was waiting. So she answered. "I was working day shifts at a diner in Cicero," she said. "Owner sold the place. New management cut staff. I had rent due, and exactly 6 days before my landlord changed the locks. A girl I knew from the diner said Halcyon needed waitresses and sometimes offered rooms upstairs to staff they trusted. She said the money was better. I knew it sounded too easy. I took the interview anyway." "Who hired you?" "Victor Kane." The name sat in the air between them. "Tell me about him." Emma gave a small laugh that had no warmth in it. Smooth, careful, too handsome for his own good and aware of it every minute. He remembered names asked where people were from made you feel like you had been selected for something special. During the interview he said Halcyon was family. Said he rewarded loyalty. Said discretion mattered. He talked like a man selling a dream to people who couldn't afford to be suspicious. "And you believed him." "I believed I needed a paycheck." He tilted his head slightly, conceding the point. She went on before she could lose the nerve. The first month, Victor stayed charming. He checked in on the floor, slipped cash to girls when big spenders came in, handled angry clients before things escalated. If a man got handsy, security appeared before you had to ask. He made the place look safe enough to stay. And then I started seeing girls disappear from the bar. His hand resting so casually against his knee went still. Emma looked down at her bag. At first it was gradual. Somebody who used to serve cocktails suddenly only worked private booths. Then she was upstairs. Then she stopped meeting your eyes. If you asked about it, she said the money was better. Or she said she had a choice. Or she smiled too fast and changed the subject. You said girls. How many? "I don't know. Enough. Names." Emma shut her eyes for a moment, trying to sort faces from memory. Tessa Monroe. She started 2 weeks before me. Blonde, loud laugh had a little silver ring in her left thumb. She said she was saving for cosmetology school. A month later, she was never on the main floor anymore. Then there was Lily Carter. She was younger than she said she was. You could tell when she forgot to pretend. Sophie Duran from Texas. Becca Sloan, maybe more. Some came and went too fast, and Victor handled them personally, usually. Or one of the older hostesses would take them upstairs and tell everyone they were being trained for premium service. He let the phrase hang there. "Premium service," he repeated quietly. Emma hated how the word sounded in his voice. Stripped clean. Made ugly. That's what they called it. Did anyone ever explain it directly to you? At first, no. Just comments. Hints. Questions about whether I wanted to make real money. Whether I was tired of counting tips. whether I understood what kind of place Halcyon really was. Then, one night, Victor waited until the floor was slow and leaned against the bar while I polished glasses. He said customers were asking about me. Her voice had flattened without her meaning it to. He said I had a look that sold well. Said women like me wasted their earning potential when we stayed behind a tray. I told him I was a waitress. He smiled like I was being childish and said labels were flexible. The driver merged onto Lake Street. The tires hissed through standing water. "What did you say?" "That I wasn't interested." And he stopped. Emma turned to him fully now, incredulous. "No. Men like him never stop when you say no once. They just change tactics." For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Not surprise. Not even anger. Something colder than both. Recognition, maybe. The kind that comes from hearing a familiar pattern. "He started with money," she said. Then flattery, then pressure. Told me girls upstairs made more in one night than I made in a week. Told me rent in the city was only getting worse. Told me I was smart enough to know serving drinks was temporary unless I learned how to be useful. "You had the room by then." "Yes." So he had leverage. She nodded once. The word felt ugly, but true. That room had become the center of every threat without anyone needing to say it out loud. If she lost the job, she lost the bed. If she lost the bed, she lost her address. If she lost her address, getting hired anywhere else got harder. Poor women understood chains even when they were made of paperwork and locks instead of metal. "You stayed anyway," he said. "I needed time." For what? To save. To find something else. To make sure that if I walked out, I wouldn't be sleeping under an overpass 2 nights later. His gaze moved to the bag in her lap. "How much did you save?" The question stung because it was practical. "Not enough." "That's not a number." Emma looked down at her damp fingers and forced herself to answer. "A little over $900. Maybe a little more. In 8 months." She felt the shame before she felt the anger. "I paid for food, laundry, bus fare, replaced my phone after a drunk guy smashed it, sent money to my younger brother twice when he was short on rent in St. Louis. Not everyone gets to stack cash because they feel like it." He did not apologize. Somehow, that made it easier to keep talking. "I wasn't throwing money away. I was surviving." "I know." 2 simple words. Quiet, certain. Emma blinked. Something in her chest tightened unexpectedly. He turned his attention toward the windshield again. Outside, the rain had thinned to a mist, but the streets were still slick with reflected light. When did Victor stop asking and start deciding, he said. She let out a long breath. 3 weeks ago. Maybe 4. He brought in new girls. Younger, better dressed. Some looked excited, some looked scared, some already had that blank look like they'd learned to float above themselves. He started spending more time upstairs. More regular clients came in. The bartenders were told to push higher tabs. Security got rougher about where staff could walk without permission. And you. He became polite in public and ugly in private. My Friday shifts turned into Tuesdays. My tips started disappearing from the envelope in the office. One night he told me my room was part of a larger expectation of loyalty. Another night he said I was making things difficult for everyone by acting like I was better than the work. Adrian's eyes moved back to her. "Were you?" "No," she answered too quickly, then forced herself to say more. "I never thought I was better than anyone. Not the girls upstairs. Not the women who said yes because they had to. I just knew if I crossed that line I would hate myself for being talked into it by a man who thought hunger made him powerful." Silence settled again. A deeper one this time. The car passed under the shadow of the elevated tracks, and for a moment the interior dimmed to near black. In the glass she could see his reflection watching her. "You said no more than once," he said. "Yes. How many times?" I stopped counting. He accepted that. Or maybe he understood enough not to press. Emma rubbed a thumb across the rough seam of the canvas strap in her lap. Her hands were starting to warm up now, and that made everything hurt more clearly. Tonight he came to my room without knocking, she said. The air in the SUV sharpened. He had 2 security guys with him. One stayed in the hall. The other leaned against the door like I was already a problem to move. Victor looked around the room and smiled like he was embarrassed for me. He said I'd made my choice. I asked what choice. He said the kind that wastes everyone's time. She could still see the way his eyes had moved over her things, as if measuring how quickly a life could be packed and erased. I told him I had a shift tomorrow, and he said not anymore. The driver turned south. Emma recognized the route then and felt her stomach knot. They were not taking her to some random hotel. They were not driving toward the highway. They were circling back. She looked at the man beside her more carefully now, searching his face for something she had missed under the shock of the alley. The expensive suit, the scar through the brow, the quiet driver, the car no one on that block would ever dare approach. The ease with which he occupied silence. She had been too tired to think past the obvious danger of getting in. Now another kind of danger was taking shape. "Who are you?" she asked. He met her eyes. Adrian Moretti. The name hit her a second before her thoughts caught up with it. Not just a rumor then. Not just a story told in kitchens and behind bars and between cigarettes after close. Not the vague shadow people mentioned when a building changed hands too quickly, or a manager started acting like he had backing no one could see. Adrian Moretti. Emma had never met him. She had only heard things. He owned properties under shell companies. He made problems disappear when they threatened the right people. He was civilized until he wasn't. He never raised his voice unless the room belonged to him already. He had judges on speed dial, or maybe it was myth and fear doing what it always did around powerful men, making them larger in absence. She stared. "You own Halcyon," she said. "One of several properties." The words were mild. The effect was not. Emma's hand moved on instinct toward the door. "Open that while we're moving," he said calmly, "and you'll break your wrist before you hit the pavement." Her hand stopped. He was not threatening her. He was stating physics. She pulled back slowly. "You should have said that sooner. You still got in. I didn't know whose car it was." "That's true." Something close to frustration flashed through her. "So what is this? Are you taking me back because you think I'm lying? Because if Victor told you his version first, then I promise he left out the part where he tried to sell me to his clients." Adrian turned toward her completely. His gaze was steady enough to make her heart kick once against her ribs. "If Victor had spoken to me first, he said you wouldn't be in this car. He would." Emma searched his face for any sign that he was playing with her. There was none. "You believe me?" He looked at the bag in her lap, at her soaked shirt, at the damp apron twisted at her waist. "You are still wearing the uniform of the place that threw you out," he said. "You have one bag after 8 months of work. You are crying hard enough that your throat hurts even though you're doing your best to stop. Women who lie for leverage usually prepare better." The bluntness of it almost made her laugh. Instead, she looked away because her eyes burned again. He reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a folded white handkerchief. No monogram, no flourish, just clean linen. He held it out. Emma hesitated, then took it. The cloth was dry and faintly smelled of cedar and something expensive she didn't have a name for. She pressed it to her face once and hated herself a little for how much relief there was in something so small. "Thank you," she said. He gave a barely visible nod. A few blocks passed in silence. Then, softer now, she asked, "Did you know?" The question lived somewhere between accusation and plea. His eyes stayed on the windshield. Know what? What he was doing there. Upstairs. With the girls. With me. A red light washed over his face, and then was gone. "No," he said. The answer came fast enough to feel honest. It also came with something harder beneath it. Not defensiveness. Disgust. Emma studied him. "How can you own a place like that and not know? Because ownership and oversight are not the same thing. That sounds convenient. It sounds true. She should have pushed harder. Maybe another night she would have. But fatigue had stripped her down to instinct, and instinct told her his answer mattered not because it cleared him, but because he was already asking himself the same question in a harsher voice than she ever could. He pulled out his phone and typed something quickly. The screen glowed pale across his hand. Then he raised it and made a call. When the voice on the other end answered, he spoke in a low, controlled murmur. "Get me full staff files for Halcyon. Payroll, housing agreements, camera access, everything. Wake Evelyn." A pause. "Now." He ended the call and slid the phone away. Emma stared at him. "Who's Evelyn?" "The person who tells me the truth when other people get creative." That answer, strange as it was, made sense. Outside, the city thickened again. More traffic, more light. She recognized the cross street before the driver turned. Her stomach dropped. "No." Adrian looked at her. "No what?" "Don't take me back there." He watched her for one long second. "I am taking you back there. He'll see me. Yes, he'll retaliate. No, you don't know him." A shadow of something almost impatient crossed his face. "I know the kind of man who mistakes borrowed power for his own." Emma tightened her grip on the handkerchief still in her lap. "You don't understand. Men like Victor don't hit first when they're scared. They smile. They deny. They twist things until you sound unstable. They make the room feel like you imagined all of it." Adrian's gaze held hers. "And then they learn whether the room belongs to them." The certainty in his voice was absolute. Not flashy, not loud. Absolute. Emma looked away before she could let herself trust it too much. The driver slowed as they approached the district again. Halcyon's neighborhood always looked better from a distance than it did on foot. The main entrance sat beneath tasteful black awnings and artful gold lettering, the kind of exterior designed to tell wealthy people their sins would be handled discreetly. Out back, the alley smelled like bleach grease, wet cardboard, and the kind of desperation nobody decorated. Emma had always entered through the side or the back unless told otherwise. Tonight, even seeing the glow of the sign from down the block made her chest tighten. A memory hit her without warning. Victor, outside the office 3 nights ago, hand on the wall by her shoulder, speaking softly enough that no one else could hear. "You are making the wrong kind of enemies, Emma." She had said, "By doing my job." He smiled. "By pretending it's the only one available to you." She remembered the smell of his cologne, the polished cuff at his wrist, the way he said available, like she was a product sitting unclaimed on a shelf. Her fingernails pressed into her palm now until the sting grounded her. Adrian noticed. "Look at me." She did. The command should have felt invasive. It did not. It cut through panic with surgical precision. "When we go in," he said, "you stay close. You answer only when I ask you to. If anyone touches you, they answer to me." The words were simple, not tender, not theatrical, somehow more intimate because of that. Emma searched his face again, and what unsettled her most was not whether he could do what he said. It was that he believed it enough not to perform it. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. His expression gave away nothing. "I haven't decided if I am." It was the same answer, but it landed differently now. The SUV turned the final corner. Ahead, through the mist and neon, the Halcyon Lounge rose into view like a promise made by the wrong kind of man. The gold script above the entrance gleamed wet under the lights. 2 smokers stood beneath the awning with collars up and drinks in hand. A valet moved toward the curb before realizing what car had pulled in and freezing just slightly in place. Emma's breath caught. Her pulse climbed so fast it made the edges of her vision sharpen. The driver stopped. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then Adrian reached for the handle and opened his door. Cool night air touched the inside of the car. Music from the club drifted out deep and distant, all bass and velvet and expensive lies. Adrian stepped onto the sidewalk and looked back at her. "Come on, Emma." She stared at the entrance where she had spent 8 months learning how quickly a smile could become a warning, how easily a paycheck could become a leash, how often women were expected to choose between dignity and survival as though those were ordinary options. The handkerchief was still in her hand. She folded it once, set it carefully on the seat beside her, and got out. Together they crossed the wet sidewalk toward the doors of Halcyon. Emma felt every step in her throat. The valet moved aside without being asked. One of the smokers near the entrance lowered his cigarette and stared. The bouncer at the door reached for the handle so fast it almost looked like fear. Adrian did not acknowledge any of them. He walked through the front entrance like the building had exhaled for him. Inside Halcyon was exactly what it had always pretended to be. Velvet darkness. Amber light. Crystal glasses catching gold at the edges. Music heavy enough to vibrate in the ribs. Women moving through the room with trays balanced on perfect wrists. Men in expensive jackets leaning close across polished tables, smiling like the night belonged to them. But the mood shifted the moment Adrian stepped onto the main floor. It was subtle at first. A bartender missed the rim of a glass. A hostess near the front paused in the middle of greeting a new table. One of the private servers straightened so abruptly she nearly lost the bottle in her hand. People did not know why the air had changed yet. They only felt it. Emma stayed half a step behind Adrian, trying not to shrink and failing. She knew every angle of this room, the long marble bar on the left, the sunken lounge area in back, the velvet rope guarding the VIP section that was mostly for appearances because the real privacy always started upstairs. The mirrored pillars that made the space look deeper and richer than it was. The silver trays tucked beneath the service station. The corner where Tessa used to stand when her feet hurt. The back hall where Victor liked to stop women when there were no witnesses. Nothing about the room had changed. That made the ache worse. A server. Emma recognized, looked straight at her, and then quickly away. Another did a double take, eyes widening when she took in the wet uniform, the apron still tied around Emma's waist, and Adrian walking beside her like a verdict. At the far end of the room, under a low-hanging chandelier above the VIP booths, Victor Kane was laughing at something a client had said. He had one arm stretched along the back of the booth, posture loose and polished dark suit pressed tie, gone cufflinks, catching the light. He looked exactly the way he always did when he believed he had control of every moving piece in the room. Then he saw Adrian. The smile stayed for half a second too long. Then his eyes found Emma. The smile vanished. The man across from him turned to look, saw whatever was on Victor's face, and slowly removed his hand from the table like he did not want any part of what was about to happen. Victor stood. Even from across the floor, Emma saw the moment he tried to recover. Chin up, jacket smoothed, expression arranged into professional concern. He stepped out from the booth and met them near the edge of the dance floor where the lights pulsed low and red across the room. "Mr. Moretti," he said. His voice was smooth, too smooth. "If I'd known you were coming, I would have made sure the private room was ready." Adrian stopped in front of him. "That's the problem." Victor gave the smallest laugh. "I'm sorry." Adrian turned his head just enough to look at Emma, then back at Victor. "Why isn't she working?" The question landed harder than if he had shouted. Victor glanced at Emma as if seeing her clearly for the first time. It was an excellent performance, almost convincing. She had seen him use that look on clients, on police, on new hires, on women he was about to corner. "Emma chose to leave," he said. "I'm surprised she tracked you down to make it dramatic." Emma's stomach turned, but Adrian did not even blink. "She did not track me down." Victor's gaze sharpened. "Then I'm afraid I don't understand." "You understand perfectly." Music throbbed around them. A couple near the bar had gone quiet. A hostess froze halfway through pouring champagne. Somewhere behind Emma, someone laughed too loudly and then stopped. Victor folded his hands in front of him like a man moderating a business misunderstanding. "If there has been some complaint, I'd rather discuss it in private." Adrian's face did not change, no. That single word cracked through the music more cleanly than anything louder would have. Victor tried again. She was not a good fit. For what job? The smile on Victor's mouth thinned by a degree. For the direction this club is moving in. Emma felt heat rise up her neck. He was doing exactly what she said he would. Dressing coercion in corporate language until it looked civilized. Adrian looked around the room once. Just once. Say it plainly. Victor's jaw flexed. Some of our staff take on more exclusive service arrangements. That is not plain. A silence opened. Victor lowered his voice. This isn't the place. Adrian stepped closer, not enough to touch, only enough to alter the geometry between them. Victor was tall. Adrian still made him look like a man backing toward a ledge. You threw an employee into the street in the rain because she refused to sleep with your clients. The words fell into the room like glass. Emma heard the intake of breath from somebody nearby. A man at the bar slowly turned on his stool. One of the women in the VIP booth set her drink down with a careful hand. Victor's entire body stiffened. That is not what happened. Then explain what did. Victor looked at Emma as though she had forced him into the role of victim. You know how unstable some girls can get when they don't receive the opportunities they expected. Emma actually laughed then. A small, sharp sound that made Victor's eyes flash. Adrian heard it. So did everyone else close enough to pretend not to. Opportunities, Adrian repeated. Is that what you call it now? Victor spread one hand. This is a high-end venue. Clients expect discretion and flexibility. We reward staff who understand that. Emma refused to adapt. Emma took one step forward before she could stop herself. I was hired to wait tables. Victor turned to her with that familiar patient smile, the one that made people feel talked over before he even opened his mouth. You were hired into a hospitality environment with upward options, Emma. You knew that. No, I knew you lied. His smile hardened. Careful. Adrian's head turned slightly at that one word. No, you be careful. Victor went still. Adrian reached into his inside pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number without taking his eyes off him. When the call connected, he said, "Kill the music." For one surreal beat, nothing happened. Then the speakers cut out. The bass vanished. The room inhaled. Without the music, Halcyon sounded different. Glass on marble. Ice settling in buckets. Heels on polished floor. Breathing. The hum of the liquor coolers behind the bar. A cough from the far corner. The whole place suddenly naked and smaller than it had been a moment before. Every head turned. Victor looked around like he had been slapped in public. Adrian raised his voice just enough to carry from one end of the room to the other. Everybody out. Nobody moved. Some people looked confused, some offended. A man near the back laughed under his breath and said, "Who the hell does he think he is?" The answer came before anyone spoke it. 3 men in dark jackets appeared from the side entrance. 2 more came down the back hall. Another stepped in from the service corridor near the bar. They were not Halcyon security. Emma had never seen them before, but everybody else knew immediately they belonged to Adrian. They moved with calm precision. "Evening's over," one of them said to a table near the front. "Please head to the door." A woman in a silk dress frowned. "We just opened a bottle." The man took the bottle from the ice bucket, set it on the table, and said, "Then take the memory with you." At the bar, another of Adrian's men spoke quietly to 2 clients who looked ready to protest. One of them took a look toward Adrian and changed his mind without saying a word. The room began to drain. The speed of it made Emma lightheaded. People who had spent the last hour acting like kings and queens of the city suddenly moved like they had somewhere urgent to be. Women gathered purses. Men finished drinks in one swallow and left the glasses behind. Staff looked at one another with wide eyes, unsure whether to run or stand still. The velvet illusion of Halcyon peeled off in strips. Victor found his voice again. "You can't just clear the room in the middle of service." Adrian turned to him. "I just did." One of the hostesses hurried toward the back with tears in her eyes. A bartender Emma knew from weekends stood frozen behind the counter until one of Adrian's men said, "Staff stays." The bartender nodded too fast and looked away. Within 2 minutes, the clients were gone. The front doors shut. One of Adrian's men locked them from the inside. The click echoed through the room. Emma had never heard Halcyon silent before. Not truly. Even before opening, there was always music, someone checking speakers, someone testing lights, Someone laughing too loud from nerves. Silence made the place look ugly. The mirrors reflected too much. The stains in the grout showed. A lipstick mark remained on the rim of a half-full glass abandoned near the booth. It looked almost obscene in the bright newly raised lights. Victor noticed the lights too late. Who ordered House Up? I did, Adrian said. The overheads had come on while the room emptied. No flattering amber, no forgiving shadows. White light spilled across everything. Emma saw the second-floor staircase in the back more clearly than she had ever seen it from the main floor. Victor took a breath, trying to gather himself. If there's an issue with policy, I can explain the revenue structure privately. There are realities to operating a venue at this level that perhaps haven't been fully communicated to you. There it was. The pivot. Profit. As if numbers could bleach what he had done. Adrian walked past him toward the bar. He ran one finger along the marble and looked at the dust and moisture it picked up. He set his hand down, turned, and asked, "How much does this location bring in monthly?" Victor hesitated. "It depends on season." "How much?" 200,000 on average. Sometimes more. "How much comes from liquor?" Victor licked his lower lip, roughly 30%. Adrian let that sit for a second too long. "And the rest?" Victor glanced at Emma, then away. "Private experiences. High-margin services. Client retention packages." Emma wanted to be sick. Adrian's expression sharpened to something almost unreadable. "Women." Victor's silence was answer enough. One of the bartenders made a small sound in the back of his throat. Another stared down at the counter as if eye contact might turn him into a witness. Adrian looked toward the back hall. "Where's her room?" Victor blinked. "Her what?" "The room above this club that came with the job you used to control her." Victor's face lost color again. That arrangement was temporary housing for selected staff. "Where is it?" Victor swallowed. "Upstairs." "Show me." For a moment, Emma thought he might refuse. She almost wished he would. She had seen Victor angry and amused and manipulative. She had never seen him cornered from above. It stripped something from him. He nodded once and gestured stiffly toward the rear corridor. "This way." Adrian looked at Emma. "Stay with me." She fell into step beside him. The back hall smelled like citrus cleaner and old smoke. The same framed black and white photographs still lined the walls. Men in tuxedos. Women with lacquered smiles. Manufactured glamour from another era, chosen to tell clients they were entering a tradition instead of a trap. Victor walked ahead of them, shoulders too straight. At the base of the stairs, one of Adrian's men moved to follow. Adrian lifted a hand. "Down here." The man stopped. Victor glanced back. "You don't need an escort for me." "No," Adrian said. "You need one for you." They started up. Emma had climbed those stairs half asleep more nights than she could count, tray burns still hot on her wrists, feet throbbing, makeup gone patchy from sweat and time. Tonight, every step felt foreign. The carpet runner muffled their shoes. The brass railing gleamed under the lights. Somewhere farther down the corridor on the second floor, a door shut softly. Victor noticed Emma hearing it and said too quickly, "Those rooms are unoccupied tonight." Emma almost laughed again. He was still lying, even now. The second-floor corridor stretched long and narrow under dim sconces. Doors on either side. Some closed. Some cracked open just enough to show slivers of bedspreads, vanity lights, a shoe kicked beneath a chair. The hallway had always made Emma uneasy. Too quiet compared to the club below. Too much carpet. Too little air. Victor stopped near the end and pulled a ring of keys from his pocket. Emma knew the door before he reached it. Her room had been her room. The brass number still hung slightly crooked from where someone had once slammed it too hard. Victor slid in the key. For a beat nobody moved. Then he opened the door. Emma felt the world narrow. Empty. Not messy. Not partly packed. Stripped. The mattress gone. Lamp gone. Dresser gone. Her extra shoes gone. The cheap blanket she bought from a discount store on Cermak gone. The mug with the chipped handle gone. Even the curtain rod had been removed, leaving pale marks against the wall where it used to be. Only the window remained black, with wet glass, and the shape of absence everywhere else. She stepped past Victor before she realized she had moved. No. The word came out small and breathless. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps as if she might find a drawer overlooked, a shirt dropped behind the door, some proof that a life had existed here. Her hand touched the wall where the dresser should have been. Bare paint. Cold. Nothing. Behind her, Adrian asked, "Where are her belongings?" Victor cleared his throat. "Placed in storage." Emma turned. "You took everything." Victor gave her a look that almost passed for pity. Standard procedure. Her face went hot. "I had pictures in here. If they were left behind, they were boxed." "Boxed where?" "In storage, Emma." Adrian moved into the room then, and the air changed with him. He looked once around the stripped space and understood all of it. The violence of erasure. The message. Comply or disappear. How long did she live here? Victor shifted his weight. Approximately 8 months. And she left with 1 bag. She was removed from the property after termination. She had time to collect essentials. Emma stared at him. "You gave me 5 minutes." Victor smiled without warmth. "You should have packed faster." The words had barely left his mouth before Adrian crossed the distance between them. Not violently, not yet. He just stepped close enough that Victor had to tilt his chin up a fraction to maintain eye contact. "Look at the room." Victor did not respond. Adrian's voice dropped. "Look at it." Victor obeyed. "This is what you do when you want someone erased," Adrian said. "Not terminated, erased." Victor swallowed. Emma had never seen him scared enough to forget his posture. Tonight, it was happening by inches. Adrian took out his phone again. "Evelyn, 2nd floor, now." A pause. "Bring legal payroll and cameras. I want every contract tied to this property on my desk within the hour. Every staff file, every housing agreement, every internal transfer." He listened, gaze still on Victor. "Seal the exits. Separate staff from management. No one leaves." He ended the call and put the phone away. Victor finally found some anger under the panic. "This is insane. You're blowing up a profitable venue because one girl got emotional after a staffing decision." Emma flinched before she could stop herself. Adrian noticed that too. He looked at Victor with a kind of stillness that made Emma's pulse slow instead of race. The worst thing about him, she was beginning to understand, was not his anger. It was his control. "One girl," Adrian repeated softly. "Say that again." Victor held his ground for about 2 seconds. Then he looked away. Adrian turned toward the corridor. "Open every occupied room." Victor snapped his head back. "You can't be serious." "I am. There are paying clients. Confidential arrangements." Adrian looked at him. Not anymore. Heavy footsteps sounded from the staircase. More of Adrian's people. A woman's brisk heels, voices low and efficient. Emma stood in the middle of her empty room apron, still tied at her waist, the walls bare around her, and listened as the floor beneath Halcyon shifted under a different kind of power. The first door down the hall opened. Then another. Then another. And all through the club below, the night that Victor Kane had been selling as business began to come apart. The hallway filled fast. Men in dark suits moved with clipped precision, opening doors, checking rooms, escorting women out one by one, with more care than Emma had expected, and more force than Victor clearly liked. Behind them came Evelyn. She was in her 50s, maybe a little older. Silver hair cut clean at the jaw, charcoal coat still damp at the shoulders from the mist outside. She carried a leather folder tucked under one arm, and wore the kind of expression that made excuses sound childish before anyone tried them. Her eyes went first to Adrian, then to the stripped room, then to Emma standing in the middle of it, like somebody had yanked the floor out from under her and forgotten to let her fall. "Mr. Moretti," she said. "Status. We have staff separated downstairs. Doors sealed. Camera access is being mirrored to an external server now. Payroll records are coming out of the office. The bar manager tried to delete internal scheduling logs. He has been relieved of his laptop." Victor's face tightened. This is becoming theatrical. Evelyn looked at him without interest. No, this is becoming documented. Adrian stepped aside, letting her into the room. Evelyn studied the walls, the bare floor, the empty closet. This was cleared tonight. Victor lifted one shoulder. Former staff accommodations are reset immediately. Emma laughed under her breath. It came out hollow. Evelyn turned toward her, not unkindly. Did you have personal property in here? Yes. What kind? Clothes, shoes, a lamp, photos, toiletries, a mug, a blanket, a small speaker, things that belonged to me. How much notice were you given? 5 minutes. Evelyn wrote something down. Did anyone inventory your belongings in front of you? No. Did you sign a termination form? No. Did anyone provide severance final pay or a written explanation for your removal? No. Victor crossed his arms. She is overstating the situation. Adrian did not raise his voice. She has answered. You have not been asked. That shut him up. From the corridor came the muted sound of a woman crying, then a low voice calming her, then footsteps moving away. Emma turned instinctively. One of the other doors farther down the hall was standing open now. She could see the edge of a vanity light, the crumpled corner of a satin robe on the floor, a wine glass tipped on its side. Evelyn noticed the direction of her gaze. How many women lived on this floor? Emma dragged herself back to the question. I don't know exactly. It changed. Some rooms stayed full. Some girls were moved in and out fast. Approximate. 12 maybe, sometimes more. And how many were hired first as bar staff, servers, hostesses, or event girls? Emma took a breath. At least 5. Maybe 6. Those are just the ones I knew. Victor spoke before he could stop himself. They were adults making decisions. Adrian turned to him. You keep reaching for language that sounds consensual. Victor's jaw shifted. Because it was. Emma looked at him, really looked. You cut my shifts after I said no. He said nothing. You started holding my tip envelopes in the office and half the cash disappeared. Still nothing. You told Tessa she could either help upstairs or lose her room. Victor's eyes moved to her. Cold now. No performance left in them. Tessa wanted money. Emma took a step toward him. So did I. That doesn't make what you did a choice. The corridor went quiet around that line. For a second, even the movement behind them seemed to slow. Evelyn closed her folder. I want statements from every woman on this floor and every staff member who handled housing and scheduling. Separate rooms. No one interviews in pairs. No one returns to their phones. One of Adrian's men nodded and moved off. Victor gave a short, incredulous laugh. You cannot interrogate employees in the middle of the night without counsel. Evelyn answered before Adrian had to. Counsel can meet us downstairs. I'm sure they'll enjoy the camera footage. Adrian looked at Emma. Come with me. He led them back down the hall, past doors standing open like split seams, past a girl in a borrowed sweatshirt clutching her arms around herself while one of Evelyn's women spoke softly to her past another room where the bedspread was twisted one heel under the chair, a false eyelash stuck to the mirror. The whole floor looked less like luxury than aftermath. Emma kept her eyes forward. At the stairs, Victor stopped. I should be present for any staff questioning. These women report to me. Adrian turned on the landing. That is exactly why you will not be. 2 of his men stepped in behind Victor, not touching him, only making the path around them impossible. For the first time all night, Victor seemed to understand that his movements were no longer his own. They brought him downstairs. The office looked smaller than Emma remembered. Victor usually made it feel impressive. Dim lighting. Expensive whiskey arranged on a shelf. A black desk too large for the room chosen to imply importance. Framed licensing documents on the wall. A low leather chair for clients, a harder one for staff. Even now, with bright light flattening everything and strangers moving through drawers, the room still smelled like him. Clean cologne over tobacco and something metallic underneath. Victor was placed in the chair behind his own desk as if irony itself had taken a seat. Emma sat opposite him with her bag on the floor beside her. Adrian stood at the window, one hand in his pocket, watching the alley below where more cars had arrived. Evelyn opened files on the desk one by one. "This is your housing log," she said to Victor. "This is your internal compensation sheet. This is the unofficial ledger your accountant kept hidden behind the wall panel beside the liquor safe." Victor's composure frayed at the edges. "None of that means anything without context." Evelyn slid one sheet toward Adrian. Girls assigned to second-floor rooms were marked with colored tabs. Blue for stable, red for resistant, green for profitable. Some have side notations. Emma leaned forward before she could stop herself. There, in Victor's neat hand beside initials she recognized were words written like inventory, flexible, needs pressure, no family local, can upgrade, problem. Her stomach folded. Next to ER was a single line. Thinks she has principles. Victor saw Emma reading and looked away. Adrian picked up the page. His face changed so little it made the change worse. He set it back down, read the notations aloud. Victor stared at him. No. Adrian did not move, read them. Silence stretched. Finally, Victor said, "These are operational shorthand notes. Read them." Victor's throat worked once. Client-friendly. Housing-dependent. Financially motivated. Resistant but salvageable. Emma felt something inside her go cold and hard. Salvageable. As if he had been taking broken pieces apart and deciding which ones could be sold. Evelyn opened another folder. "We pulled banking copies from the office terminal. Several women were charged rent deductions they never agreed to. Late fees, clothing fees, training fees, security fees, transportation advances. None of it appears in the contracts on file." Victor lifted his chin. "House standards cost money." Emma turned to him. "You charged girls for towels." He answered, without shame, "Nothing is free." Evelyn continued, "You also withheld wages after refusal incidents." Victor smiled thinly. "Refusal incidents. That is what your spreadsheet calls them." For the first time, Adrian left the window and came to the desk. He rested both hands lightly on the edge, leaning just enough to bring himself level with Victor without actually lowering himself. "You built leverage into every part of the room." Victor met his gaze because there was nowhere else to look. "I built a business that worked." Adrian's voice stayed soft. "You built obedience and labeled it management." Outside the office, footsteps passed, then returned. One of Evelyn's team knocked once and stepped in. She was younger, dark hair and a low-knot tablet in hand. "We have 12 completed staff interviews so far," she said. 7 corroborate coercion tied to housing or schedule manipulation. 3 describe withheld cash. 2 say clients became physical after staff tried to decline. 1 girl says she was told local employers would be warned she was unstable if she left. Victor started to speak. Adrian looked at him once, and he stopped. "Names," Adrian said. The woman read from her tablet. Tessa Monroe, Lily Carter, Sophie Duran, Jenna Price, Naomi Bell. 2 asked to wait before signing statements but told the same story verbally. Emma recognized every name except one. The woman hesitated. "There's more. One of the girls from upstairs says she is 21. Her driver's license says 21. The birth date on the digital payroll entry is different from the copy in her employment packet. It would make her 17. The room changed. Not in noise, in density. Even Victor felt it. "That is impossible," he said too fast. "We check IDs at intake." Evelyn did not look at him. "You copied them. That is not the same thing." The woman with the tablet went on. "Another 2 are inconsistent. One says she came from Houston for event work and hasn't had access to her own documents since arriving. Another says her passport was held during a housing transfer." Emma's fingers dug into the arms of the chair. Adrian's eyes remained on Victor's face. "Where are the documents?" Victor swallowed. Administrative lockbox. Evelyn opened a smaller envelope from the stack already on the desk. We found 12 passports in your safe. Victor blinked. Those belong to international entertainers and temporary staff. 6 do not match current employees. His mouth opened, then closed. Adrian straightened. Bring every woman from the second floor somewhere warm. Get food in them. Phones collected but accessible through staff if they need to make family calls. No one is left alone. The younger woman nodded and left. Emma looked up at Adrian. There was no hesitation in him now. No private calculation she could see. Just movement. Order. Lines being redrawn in real time. That scared her almost as much as it steadied her. Evelyn turned to Emma. I need your full statement tonight. Emma looked toward the door. Now. She glanced at Victor. At the office where he had docked her tips, smiled while threatening her livelihood, called her ungrateful because she wouldn't surrender what he wanted. She thought she would feel triumph sitting across from him while his system was taken apart in front of him. Instead, she felt tired. Tired down to the bone. Adrian noticed. Can you do it? Emma nodded, yes. Evelyn led her to a smaller room off the main hall near the accounting office. It had once been used to store wine cases and extra glassware. Tonight, it held a folding table, 2 chairs, a pot of stale coffee, and 3 file boxes already filling with statements. Emma sat. Evelyn sat across from her and switched on a recorder. State your name. Emma Reed. Age. 27. Position at Halcyon. Waitress. Cocktail service. Dates of employment. Emma gave them. Then Evelyn asked her to begin from the first day she arrived. The telling took longer than Emma expected. Not because she lacked details, because she had too many. She talked about the interview with Victor, the way he sold the room upstairs as support for reliable staff. She talked about the first months when Halcyon still looked survivable. She described the shift after midnight, the changes in staff assignments, the language used around premium service, and exclusive arrangements. She described the first time Victor approached her directly with an offer to move upstairs for clients, the way he had smiled through it, the way he framed prostitution as ambition. Evelyn interrupted only to clarify dates, names, places in the building, who else might have heard, which nights certain girls were moved, whether Emma ever saw bruises, whether anyone admitted to debt, whether security escorted women to rooms, whether pay was handled in envelopes or transfers, who collected keys for housing, who had access to the upstairs doors. Emma answered until her throat hurt. At one point, Evelyn pushed a paper cup of coffee toward her. Emma wrapped both hands around it but forgot to drink. You said Tessa Monroe was pressured first, Evelyn said. Tell me exactly what you saw. Emma stared into the coffee. She used to joke too much. That was how you knew she was scared. Victor told her a client wanted private company after a charity event. She laughed it off. A week later, she got moved upstairs. She said the money was incredible. She bought new heels she could not afford before. Then one night I found her in the bathroom crying because a man bit her hard enough to leave a mark above the neckline, and she said she still had to go back out because the room fee wasn't covered. Evelyn wrote without looking up. Did she say room fee? Yes. Did she describe what that meant? She said if a booking failed or a client complained, they charged the girl for lost revenue. I thought she was exaggerating. You no longer think that. No. The coffee finally reached her mouth. It had gone lukewarm. She drank anyway. The interviews outside the room continued. Soft knocks. Doors opening and closing. A woman crying in another room and then lowering her voice when comfort reached her. Somewhere down the corridor, a printer began spitting out pages in angry bursts. Evelyn asked, Did Victor ever threaten you directly? Emma thought of the storage room, the office, the staircase, the hall outside her door. Yes. How? He said girls who refused to cooperate didn't last. He said references could disappear. He said loyalty mattered in this city. He said I was making the wrong kind of enemies. Evelyn met her eyes then. Did you believe him? Emma laughed softly. I worked for him. Of course I believed him. The door opened a few inches, and one of Evelyn's women leaned in. Lily Carter won't talk unless Emma is present. Emma's head lifted. Is she hurt? She asked. No, shaken. Evelyn closed her folder. Take 5 minutes, then come back. Emma stood too fast and steadied herself on the table. Her legs felt numb. She followed the woman upstairs. Lily was in one of the rooms near the far end, sitting on the edge of the bed in an oversized club sweatshirt someone must have found for her. Without makeup and under white light, she looked painfully young. Younger than Emma had even realized on the floor downstairs. When she saw Emma, her face crumpled with relief so immediate it was hard to look at. "Hey," Emma said softly. Lily wiped under her eyes with the heel of her hand. "I thought you left." "I tried." That almost made Lily laugh. Adrian was in the doorway giving the room distance without leaving it unguarded. The sight of him there should have made the moment feel colder. Somehow, it didn't. He stood like a wall no one had permission to cross. Emma sat beside Lily. "What do you need?" Lily looked at her twisted hands. "I don't know what counts." "What do you mean?" "I don't know what I'm supposed to say because nobody tied me down or anything." Her voice shook on the last word. He just made it so saying no was impossible. Emma let the silence stay for a second. "That counts." Lily looked up. "Does it?" "Yes." Tears filled Lily's eyes all over again. He said if I wanted to keep the room, I had to start seeing VIP guests. He said girls who stayed on the floor too long cost the club money. He said I was pretty enough to earn my keep. Emma closed her eyes briefly. When did he start saying that? A month after I got hired. Maybe less. At first he was nice. Then he started sending me home early. Then he said I was wasting opportunities. Then he started talking about my mother's medical bills like he cared. He knew I sent money home. Adrian's voice came from the doorway, low and level. He knew everyone's pressure point. Lily nodded without looking at him. He asked questions during interviews. Family, debt, why we came to the city, who we lived with. It felt normal then. Nothing about the room moved for a moment. Emma reached out slowly and covered Lily's shaking hand with her own. "Tell them everything." Lily's throat worked. "Will they believe me?" Adrian answered this time, yes. She looked up at him, then scared, but searching for something solid. "What happens to us?" "No one is sleeping here tonight," he said. "No one loses money for leaving. No one owes this building anything by morning." Lily stared at him a second longer, then nodded as if that was the first sentence all night she had been able to stand on. Back downstairs, the office door was open when Emma passed. Victor was still behind the desk, but he no longer looked like part of it. More like something trapped there under bright light. Papers covered the surface now. Bank printouts, staff rosters, housing records, passports in a neat stack. One of Adrian's men stood by the filing cabinet, another by the door. Victor looked up as Emma crossed the hall. His expression was the same one she had seen men wear in bars right before they turned mean. Not because they were in control, but because control was leaving them and they needed someone else to carry the blame. "You think this ends well for you," he said. Emma stopped. The corridor seemed to hold its breath. Victor leaned back in the chair he no longer deserved. "Girls like you always think some powerful man walking in means salvation. He'll tear this place down, take what he needs, and move on. Men like him don't do mercy." Emma looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Maybe not." "But he didn't throw me into the street." Victor's mouth tightened. She kept walking. By the time she returned to Evelyn's table, another stack of statements had appeared. The building had taken on the rhythm of a crime scene. Not dramatic, methodical. Cold coffee, printer toner. Tired women in borrowed clothes telling the truth in fragments that became patterns under competent hands. Emma sat again. Evelyn resumed the recorder. "Let's continue," she said. And outside that small room, under white lights and dead speakers, Halcyon stopped being a nightclub and became evidence. Evidence had its own kind of silence. Not peace, not calm, something flatter than that. The silence of facts landing where lies used to live. By 3 in the morning, Halcyon no longer looked like a club. It looked like the skin had been peeled off something diseased. The bar was crowded with laptops and printed ledgers. Half the booth cushions had been lifted to check for hidden cash. The office light stayed on. Upstairs, doors stood open under harsh white bulbs, each room reduced to inventory and testimony. The air smelled of coffee-damp wool printer heat and the stale remains of perfume that had soaked too deeply into the walls to leave quickly. Emma sat at the end of the bar with a blanket around her shoulders that somebody from Evelyn's team had brought up from one of the supply closets. Her statement was finished for now. 3 pages signed. 2 pages added after she remembered names she had tried not to think about for months. Her hand still ached from writing. Across the room, Adrian stood with Evelyn over a spread of documents. He had removed his coat at some point and rolled his sleeves once to the forearm. The gesture should have made him look less formal. Instead, it only made him look more dangerous, like the night had stripped away anything decorative and left only function. Evelyn tapped a line on one of the printouts. These weekly withdrawals are consistent. Cash leaves Halcyon every second Thursday. Not enough to flag in one location, but enough to matter across 6. Emma looked up. 6. She had heard it already, but hearing it again made her chest tighten in a different place. Adrian read the page in silence. Courier. Usually unlogged. The office camera is turned off for 12 minutes during pickup. Different staff members are told different stories. Vendor payment, music licensing, private maintenance. And who signs? Victor authorizes. But the access code linked to the safe changes after every withdrawal. That level of control comes from above him. Emma watched his face from a distance. It did not give much away, but she had learned enough in a few hours to spot the difference between attention and fury. This was fury. Evelyn handed him another folder. 3 women gave the same name without prompting. Adrian opened it. The paper inside reflected white against his hand. Donovan, Pierce, Evelyn said. Regional Operations. Comes once a month, never stays long. Collects envelopes, drinks 1 whiskey. Tells managers to keep the money clean and the girls compliant. Adrian looked up slowly. He was assigned to hospitality oversight in this district. He has been overseeing something. The line landed hard enough that even from where she sat, Emma felt it. Adrian closed the folder. Pull every active record tied to Pierce. Properties, shell firms, staffing agencies, transport accounts. Change access on all systems now. Evelyn gave 1 crisp nod and moved away, already speaking to someone into her phone. Emma pulled the blanket closer around herself. She should have left hours ago. She knew that. Her body knew it too. Her shoulders ached. Her eyes burned. Her skin still felt lined with dried rain under the borrowed heat of the building. But leaving while the truth was still being lifted out of the walls felt impossible. A glass clinked somewhere behind the bar. One of Adrian's men was boxing premium bottles as evidence. Another stood at the front door with his hands folded in front of him, posture relaxed in the way men trained for violence often were. Adrian crossed the room and stopped beside her. He did not ask if the seat next to her was free. He simply took it, one hand resting on the counter, the other holding a thin sheaf of papers. Emma glanced at them. Housing records, internal payroll sheets, copies of signatures. You looked through my file, she said. I looked through all of them. Anything interesting? He handed her the top page. She recognized her own application immediately. Name. Date of birth. Prior employment. Emergency contact left blank because there had not been one worth writing. At the bottom, in blue ink, she did not remember seeing before Victor had added a private note. Stable appearance. Financial need, some resistance, can be converted later. Emma stared at the sentence until the words stopped looking like language and became something dirtier. She set the page back on the bar. He wrote that during my interview. Yes. And you let him run your club. The question came out harder than she intended, but she did not take it back. Adrian did not flinch. Yes. Emma turned toward him. How does that happen? He looked at the room before he looked at her. The stripped lights. The file boxes. The women being escorted one by one into interviews. The shell of a place that had made itself rich on pressure and silence. Distance, he said. Scale. Laziness dressed as delegation. Pick the answer you like least. She studied him. Most powerful men she had known even from afar would have deflected. Explained. Hidden behind layers of structure and intent. Adrian did none of that. He said it like he was reading charges against himself. You knew it was a club, she said. You knew what men like Victor do when nobody's watching. I knew it was profitable. That is not the same thing. No. His voice stayed quiet. It isn't. That honesty did something strange inside her. It did not absolve him. It made him harder to dismiss. He set the rest of the file down. You should leave when Evelyn finishes with the final signatures. Emma looked toward the second-floor staircase. I don't want to. Why? She took a second before answering. Because if I leave now, it feels like it all turns back into smoke. Like I imagined it. His gaze settled on her face. You did not imagine any of it. I know that here. She touched the side of her temple. The rest of me is behind. He nodded once as if that made perfect sense. Silence held for a moment between them. Not the tense kind from the car. A different one now. Weighted. Shared. Emma broke it first. What happens to Victor? Adrian looked toward the office. Victor was still in sight through the open door, shoulders stiff behind the desk while one of Evelyn's team photographed financial ledgers one page at a time. He answers questions until I am done asking them. That sounds temporary. It is. She should have left the question alone. Instead, she said, and after that, Adrian rested both forearms on the bar. After that, he answers to people who care less than I do whether he is comfortable. Emma stared at the dead speakers above the dance floor. You make that sound easy. It isn't easy. It is administrative. A tired laugh escaped her before she could stop it. He glanced at her. What? You say terrifying things like they're office memos. Maybe that is why people listen. The answer was so dry it took her a second to realize he had meant it almost as a joke. Almost. She looked at him properly then. Not the suit, not the scar, not the name. The man under the machinery of all that. His face looked more tired up close than it had in the car. Not soft, not worn out, just marked around the eyes by the kind of strain that never had time to become visible in public. Who is Donovan Pierce to you? She asked. He was supposed to be a manager. That is not what I mean. He was quiet long enough that she thought he would refuse. Then he said, he is a man I trusted not to look away. Emma let that settle. Across the room, Evelyn called for a second copy of the camera logs. Somebody answered from the office. The printer spat another burst of paper. Adrian went on, still looking ahead. There are people who work for me because they fear me. People who work for me because they like money. People who work for me because they are good at their jobs and prefer not to ask about the edges. Pierce knew the rules. If he broke them, he did it because he believed the revenue mattered more than the line, and did it. The question came out before she could decide whether it was fair. Adrian turned his head and looked at her. No. The force of the answer was not in the volume. It was in how cleanly it was spoken. Emma held his gaze. Then why do you sound like this has happened before? For the first time that night, something shifted in him that had nothing to do with command. He looked away. When he spoke again, his voice was so controlled, it almost sounded detached. That made every word sharper. My sister was 19 when she took a hostess job outside Milwaukee. She called me from a payphone on the second day and said she had changed her mind. By the time I got there, she had been moved twice. Emma did not breathe. He kept his eyes on the empty dance floor. I found her alive. That was the victory available to me. The bar seemed to recede around them. The lights, the voices, the paperwork, all of it dimmed under the image those words left behind. Emma's hand tightened on the blanket at her shoulders. I'm sorry. He inclined his head once as if acknowledging a fact rather than accepting comfort. After that, I built systems. Vetting, controls, clear orders. No minors, no coercion, no debt leverage tied to housing. No document retention. No staff movement into private service without verified consent and legal review. Emma looked at him. You say that like it should have been enough. It should have been, but it wasn't. No. The word sat between them like a piece of broken metal. For a long second, neither of them moved. Then Emma said quietly, "Is she okay?" Adrian's jaw flexed. "Depends on the day." Something in her chest gave way at that. Not pity, not even sympathy in the easy sense. Recognition. She understood people who were alive in the technical sense and still missing in every way that mattered. He noticed the look on her face and added, "This is not absolution. I know. It is context. I know that too." He seemed to accept that. His attention shifted back to the documents on the bar. Victor did not invent this. Men like him learn where institutions are weak. Then they turn weakness into business. Emma thought of the tiny room upstairs, the lock she had loved because it meant safety, the notes in her file, the tip envelopes coming up short. Tessa crying in the bathroom over a room fee charged against her body. Lily convinced coercion did not count unless someone tied her down. Weakness, Emma repeated. That is one word for it. He looked at her. What word would you use? She thought about it. Hunger, fear, isolation. Rent due on the 1st. A mother who needs money. A city where no one knows your name. Men always seem to think the trick is seduction. Most of the time it is logistics. Something like approval flickered across his face, gone almost before she could be sure it had been there. Yes, he said. Logistics. Evelyn returned then with fresh pages and a new hardness in her expression. She laid the papers on the bar in front of Adrian. We finished the first pass on staff interviews. He scanned the summary. Numbers. 23 women on site tonight. 14 report direct pressure or deceptive hiring tied to sexual access for clients. 4 were initially hired for bar floor or event roles. 3 were threatened with housing loss. 2 described withheld wages. 4 documents are under age flags pending formal verification. Emma closed her eyes for a beat. Adrian read the rest, and the others. 5 insist they chose the work from the beginning. 2 of those are still showing trafficking indicators. What kind? Debt bondage. Restricted movement. Third-party control over identity documents. One of them owes $30,000 in fabricated housing and training fees. Another has not possessed her passport in months. Emma opened her eyes again. 30,000. A number built to keep a woman running in place forever. Adrian handed the summary back. Get them counsel, not the in-house kind, independent, already in motion. And Pierce. His assistant is not answering. 2 linked properties are suddenly offline. 1 payroll server was remotely wiped 40 minutes ago. Adrian's expression went still. Then he knows. Evelyn folded her arms. Yes. Lock every location under his chain before dawn. Anyone resists suspend operations. I want bodies on site, not emails. Evelyn gave the smallest nod and moved off again, issuing instructions into her phone before she cleared the end of the bar. Emma watched her go. You really can do that. Adrian picked up the blank glass in front of him, turned it once between his fingers and set it down again. Yes. She looked toward the office. And Victor. He is no longer my immediate problem. As if summoned by his name, Victor appeared in the doorway, with one of Adrian's men half a step behind him. His tie was gone now. His face had the color of wet paper. I want a lawyer, Victor said. Adrian did not turn. You can have one. Victor took another step into the room. This club generates too much money for you to burn over one payroll dispute and a few staff grievances. A few staff grievances. Emma felt something dark and clear move through her tiredness. Adrian stood. The room paid attention in an instant. Victor saw it happen and hesitated, but he was too frightened now not to keep talking. You shut this place down tonight and you create exposure in every direction. Regulators, tax people, clients who will not appreciate records surfacing. If this becomes public, everyone takes damage. Adrian faced him fully. Everyone already did. Victor's eyes flicked to Emma. You're letting a waitress build a narrative for you. Emma rose before she knew she had decided to. The blanket slipped from her shoulders and pooled on the stool behind her. No, she said, you built it. I just refuse to keep quiet. Victor laughed once thin and ugly. You think he cares about women like you? The whole room seemed to sharpen around that sentence. Adrian took one step forward. He did not need a second. Victor stopped smiling. Adrian's voice was low enough that everyone leaned inward to hear it. Women like her walked out into the rain with nothing rather than let you decide what access to their bodies was worth. Men like you call that impractical because you have never had principles tested by hunger. Do not confuse your lack of them for realism. Victor went pale in a way Emma had not thought a face could. Nobody moved. Then Adrian said to the men beside the office, "Take him out of my sight." They did. No struggle, no scene. Victor had finally learned how much noise a man makes when he knows it will not matter. Emma stood where she was pulse thudding through her wrists. Adrian looked at her. "Sit down." She almost said no on reflex. Then she realized the command carried no edge, only an attempt to steady the room before it tilted any further. She sat. He picked up the blanket and handed it back to her. Their fingers brushed for less than a second. His hand was warm. Tracy, controlled. She took the blanket and looked away first. The hours after that blurred without disappearing. Women were moved out in pairs with overnight bags gathered from rooms upstairs. Evelyn's team arranged hotel blocks under different names. A therapist on retainer arrived near 4 and began quietly assessing whoever wanted to talk. One of the younger women called her mother from a conference room and cried so hard between sentences that Emma had to step away from the sound of it. Lily signed her statement. Tessa was located through an emergency contact in an old file and agreed to come in later that morning. Sophie was given her passport back from the stack in Victor's safe and held it against her chest like something alive. Near 5, Evelyn returned one last time with a transfer form and a tablet. "Compensation authorizations," she said to Adrian. "Immediate emergency support for all identified staff pending final legal review." He signed the first page without reading it. Then the second. Then the third. Evelyn handed the tablet to Emma. "Your portion is here." Emma looked down and nearly missed the number because her eyes refused to understand it. Back wages, restitution, emergency housing assistance, additional witness support. "It's too much," she said. Adrian answered before Evelyn did no. Emma stared at him. "You cannot just pay people until this becomes clean." "No," he said. "But I can't stop pretending money was not used to trap you and start using it to remove the trap." She looked back at the screen. The amount was more than she had earned in nearly 2 years. Enough for rent, enough for time, enough to stand still and think without hearing a lock click behind her. Her throat tightened. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything." Evelyn set a hotel confirmation and room key envelope beside the tablet. "Car is ready when you are. Secure floor. Late checkout. No staff access except ours." Emma looked from the envelope to Adrian. "And tomorrow." He held her gaze. "Tomorrow is not your first obligation." That should have relieved her. Instead, it made something inside her ache all over again. "I do not want to disappear into a hotel and wake up wondering if this was real." "You won't." "How do you know?" He reached into his inside pocket and placed a card on the bar between them. Heavy stock. A name, a direct number, nothing else. "Because if you wake up and need proof, you call." Emma looked at the card but did not touch it yet. "Why would I call you?" "That depends on what you need." The answer was careful enough to feel dangerous in a completely different way than anything else that night had been. No promise, no pressure. A door left unlocked. She picked up the card and slipped it into her bag. Around them, Halcyon continued changing shape. Boxes sealed, files tagged, mirrors covered. The first pale suggestion of morning began to show at the edges of the front windows, turning the glass from black to gunmetal gray. Emma stood slowly, the blanket gathered in one hand, her bag in the other. Adrian watched her, not moving to stop her, not pretending not to. "I was going to sleep in the bus station tonight," she said. He said nothing. "I had already decided which bench looked safest." Still nothing. She met his eyes. "So whether this is justice, or administration, or guilt, or whatever you call it, it mattered." Something in his face softened, though she would not have trusted the word soft on him in any other context. "Go sleep, Emma." She nodded. One of his men stepped forward, then younger than the others, clean-cut, quiet. "I'm Raphael," he said. "I'll drive you." Emma looked once more across the ruined glamour of Halcyon. The dead speakers. The paperwork. The lights too bright for secrets. Somewhere upstairs a door closed as another room was emptied. She turned back toward the entrance. When the front doors opened, dawn air met her face, cold and clean. The rain had finally stopped. The city smelled washed raw. Behind her, inside the club, the night still moved in low voices and signatures and locked file boxes. Ahead of her, the sidewalk shone under the first thin light of morning. Raphael held the rear door open without speaking. Emma slid into the car with the blanket still folded over her arm and her bag on her lap. When the door shut, the city became quiet again. The kind of quiet only possible after a night that had split open and kept going long past the point where any sane person should have still been awake. Raphael took the wheel. The engine turned over. Halcyon receded in the rear window. Emma watched it until the building blurred into the gray light and vanished behind a row of warehouses. She had imagined this kind of leaving before, though never like this. In her version, she packed in secret, kept her head down, found a room on the far edge of the city, and spent the next year waking up every time a car slowed outside. In that version, nobody asked questions. Nobody looked back. The world simply moved on and expected her to do the same. Now her body no longer knew what to do with the fact that she had not disappeared. She sat very still as the car crossed north through streets still half asleep. Delivery trucks idled outside loading docks. Men in reflective vests smoked beside utility vans. A woman in scrubs stood under a bus shelter coffee cup pressed between both palms. Dawn came slowly over Chicago, flattening the glamour from everything and leaving only shape and brick and weather and glass. Her phone buzzed once in her bag. For a second, panic went through her like a wire. Victor. The club, a trick, a reversal. She pulled the phone out with clumsy fingers. A deposit alert. Then another. She stared at the screen until the numbers settled into meaning. The transfer was real, not a promise. Not a threat disguised as generosity. Already done. She locked the phone and set it face down in her lap. Raphael glanced at her once in the rearview mirror, and then politely away. The hotel stood just off Michigan Avenue, all polished stone and brass. The kind of place Emma would have crossed the street to avoid on any normal day, because even the lobby looked expensive enough to ask questions she could not answer. Raphael checked them in without making her speak. The woman at the desk did not look surprised by the reservation, or by Emma's wrinkled clothes, or the fact that the man with her seemed to belong to a different world entirely. He handed her a key envelope, murmured that breakfast was available until 10, and directed them toward the elevators as if women arrived at dawn with one canvas bag all the time. On the ride up, Emma caught her reflection in the mirrored wall. Drying club uniform. Hair knotted by rain and fingers. Smudged mascara beneath both eyes. A face too pale from not enough sleep and too many hours of keeping herself under control. She hardly recognized herself. Not because she looked ruined, because she looked stripped down to something harder. Raphael walked her to the room, set the key card in her hand, and paused. "There are security staff on your floor. Discreet, you won't be disturbed." Emma looked at him. Why? He answered as if it were obvious. "Because Mr. Moretti said you weren't to be." He gave a small nod and left. The room was larger than her old life. That was Emma's first thought when she stepped inside. Not better. Not nicer. Larger. A bed with white linen and a headboard taller than she was. A bathroom where the mirror lights glowed warm instead of cruel. A chair by the window. Heavy curtains. A small table set with bottled water and fruit she knew she would not touch. She locked the door, then checked it twice. Then she crossed to the window and looked down at the waking city, one hand still resting on the deadbolt. Only after several minutes did she let herself set the bag down. She showered because it felt impossible not to. Hot water hit her shoulders and turned instantly lukewarm under the sheer amount of exhaustion that had settled in her bones. The smell of halcyon slid off in layers. Smoke, citrus cleaner, perfume. Other people's hands on glassware. Rainwater. Fear. She washed her hair twice. When she stepped out, the mirror had fogged so completely she could not see herself at all. She wrapped herself in the robe from the closet and sat on the edge of the bed. That was when the shaking started. Not dramatic. Not sobbing. Not the collapse movies liked to sell as release. Just a hard, involuntary trembling in both hands that traveled up her arms and into her chest until she had to press her palms flat to her knees to keep from feeling like she was coming apart. She waited for it to pass. Eventually it did. Her phone lit again on the nightstand. A text from Evelyn. "You should sleep. Call when you wake. It is handled." Emma lay down on top of the blanket still damp around the hairline and closed her eyes. Sleep hit her like a door slamming. When she woke, the room had shifted into late morning light. Pale gold on the curtains. A low hum from traffic far below. For one confused second, she did not know where she was. Then the night returned in pieces. The alley, the SUV. Adrian's voice in the car, her empty room. Victor's notes. Lily crying with her fists twisted in borrowed cloth. The deposit alert on her phone. The look on Adrian's face when he said his sister was alive, and that was the most generous version of the truth. Emma sat up too quickly and checked the time. 11:43. Too late for breakfast. Not that she could have eaten it anyway. Her phone showed 2 missed calls from Evelyn and a message waiting beneath them. "Come by if you can." Better to see it in daylight. Emma read the sentence twice. She dressed in the hotel clothes Raphael had clearly arranged while she slept. Black slacks, a cream sweater. Understated. New. Tags already removed. The shoes fit perfectly, which unsettled her more than anything else had all morning. It suggested a level of anticipation she did not know what to do with. Raphael was waiting in the lobby when she came down. Same dark suit. Same unobtrusive posture. "Ready?" he asked. Emma looked toward the revolving doors, where afternoon had begun to brighten the city into something almost ordinary. "No," she said. He inclined his head once. "All right." He drove without conversation. This time Emma watched the route with open eyes. Halcyon's block looked different in daylight. Smaller. Meaner. The black awnings that had seemed sleek by night now looked dingy around the edges. The tasteful gold script over the entrance was gone. So was the velvet rope. A city closure notice had been affixed to the front doors beside seizure paperwork, and a legal posting she could not read from the curb. 2 men in hard hats carried plywood through the side entrance. A white utility truck idled near the alley. People had gathered on the opposite sidewalk, drawn by the universal instinct to stare when money turned into damage. A woman from the neighboring salon was talking to a delivery driver, both of them pretending not to watch. Someone had their phone out. Somebody else pointed toward the second-floor windows. Raphael pulled around back and parked by the service entrance. Inside the club was already being dismantled. The first thing Emma noticed was the smell. Not smoke or perfume or alcohol. Dust. Fresh-cut wood. Exposed wiring. The cold mineral smell of old concrete meeting air for the first time in years. The second thing she noticed was the sound. No music. No glasses. No low laughter. Only boots on floorboards, the scrape of furniture being dragged, the short metal clink of tools, and every few minutes the blunt, echoing crack of demolition from upstairs. She stopped just inside the door. The bar had been stripped of liquor bottles. Mirrors were being unbolted from the wall. Velvet booths had been gutted and stacked in pieces. The chandelier over the dance floor was gone, leaving a clean circle of brighter paint above where it used to hang. Without darkness to flatter it, the place looked cheap beneath the polish. Too narrow, too low, too dependent on lighting tricks and everyone's willingness not to see. Adrian stood in the middle of the room speaking with Evelyn and a man holding a clipboard. He wore a dark coat over yesterday's suit as if he had never really stopped moving after she left. When he turned and saw her, he ended the conversation with one glance and crossed the floor. "You came," he said. Emma looked around. "You weren't kidding." "No." Above them, another crash split through the ceiling. Plaster dust drifted in a pale burst from the stairwell. She looked up on instinct. What are they doing? Taking the second floor apart. Her pulse kicked once. She thought of her room, of Lily's room, of every locked door along that corridor. All of it. Yes, not a trace of apology in his voice. Not because he was indifferent. Because there was nothing to apologize for in the destruction of something built to hurt people. Evelyn joined them, carrying a folder thick enough to bend under its own weight. "Victor Kane has been transferred to federal custody pending formal charges," she said. "Fraud, coercive labor practices, trafficking-related offenses, document crimes, financial concealment. More may be added." Emma let the words settle one at a time. "Federal," she repeated. Evelyn nodded. "He is having a very unpleasant morning. It should have felt satisfying." Instead, Emma felt something quieter. Not mercy. Not regret. The simple recognition that fear looked smaller on men who had made a profession of causing it, and Pierce Adrian said. Evelyn opened the folder. "2 of his locations are already locked down. One tried to move staff overnight and failed. We recovered more false contracts, more undocumented cash, more debt entries. He will either run or call. If he runs, he gets tired. If he calls, we record it." Adrian's expression did not change. "Good." Emma looked from one to the other. "This is really bigger than just this place." Neither of them answered immediately, which was answer enough. A worker approached Adrian with the clipboard. "Demo crew is ready for the West Hall." Adrian took the pencil from him, signed something without looking down for long, and handed it back. "Start with the rooms at the end. Rip out every interior wall." The worker nodded and headed for the stairs. Emma watched him go. "You're not saving any of it." Adrian turned to her. "No." He did not dress the choice up as symbolism or justice or cleansing. He just said no, and that was enough to make the sound of the next sledgehammer blow feel almost clean. They stood in silence for a moment, shoulder to shoulder but not touching, while the second floor began to come apart above them. A shriek of nails torn from framing. A thud, another. Dust floating in the shaft of light near the stairwell. This time, when Emma closed her eyes, she did not see the corridor as it had been. She saw it caving inward room by room until no one could ever be trapped there again. When she opened them, Adrian was holding an envelope. "For you," he said. Emma took it slowly and looked inside. A lease agreement. Address in Lincoln Park. 12 months paid in full. Utilities covered for the first quarter. Building access already arranged. Below it, a second document transferring ownership of the furnishings after the lease term if she chose to remain. Under that, contact information for a therapist, a legal advocate, and a bank representative assigned to help sort the transfer already sitting in her account. She looked up sharply. No. Adrian's face remained unreadable. Yes, this is too much. No. Stop saying that like it solves anything. A flicker passed through his eyes. Not amusement exactly. Something drier, more tired. It solves housing. She stared at the papers again. A real address. Not a room over a club. Not a place tied to a payroll file in a lock someone else controlled. "I can't accept an apartment from a man I met in the rain." You can. Why? His gaze moved briefly toward the staircase where another wall gave way with a crash. Then back to her. Because my building was used to trap you. Because the room tied to your job was leverage. Because if I leave you with money and no address, half the city will try to turn one into the other before the month is over. Emma said nothing. He continued quieter now, because restitution should resemble what was taken. The words took the air from her. No one had ever spoken about loss around her like that. Not as abstraction, not as resilience, as an actual inventory. She looked down at the lease again. Her hands were shaking just enough to rattle the pages. Adrian noticed. There is no deadline. Keep it, tear it up, use it for a year, and walk away. It is yours to decide. Decision. There it was again. The thing so many people like to talk about around women until actual choice appeared and made them uncomfortable. Emma slid the papers back into the envelope. I'll see it first. That was assumed. For the first time since morning, something almost like laughter moved through her chest. It hurt, but it moved. Evelyn looked at her watch. The locksmith will meet you there at 4. There are also 2 storage boxes being delivered from Halcyon once inventory is complete. We found your things. Emma blinked. My things? What was left of them, Evelyn said. Some clothing, books, personal items, photographs in a shoebox marked kitchen supplies. Victor was not a thorough man, only a cruel one. That landed somewhere tender enough to make Emma press her lips together. A younger woman from Evelyn's team approached then, tablet in hand. Lily wants to know if Emma is here. Emma turned. She stayed. She wouldn't leave without saying thank you. The words tightened something low in Emma's chest. They found Lily in what had once been the private cigar lounge off the back corridor. In daylight and stripped of its dark leather chairs, it looked like a storage room pretending to be expensive. Lily sat on a folding chair with a paper cup between both hands and someone's oversized wool coat around her shoulders. Her eyes were swollen, but when she saw Emma, relief lit her face so fast it made her look younger and older at the same time. You're okay, Lily said. Emma crossed the room and crouched in front of her. Are you? Lily gave a small shaky shrug. I think so. Or maybe I'm going to find out later. Emma understood that answer perfectly. A plastic hotel keycard lay on the side table beside Lily's elbow, along with a packet of crackers she had not opened. Real things. Small things. The kind that proved a person had a next hour. They said I'm going to a different place for a while, Lily murmured. Somewhere with counselors. That's good. I know. Lily looked down at the cup. I never told my mom the truth. I kept saying event work because if I said anything else out loud, it would become real. Emma reached for her hand and squeezed it once. You get to say it now or not say it. That part is yours. Lily looked up. Do you believe that? Emma thought about the envelope in her bag. The clean hotel sheets from the night before. The phone number on Adrian's card. The second floor of Halcyon being smashed apart above them, while men with legal clipboards carried out evidence boxes below. Yes, she said, I do. Lily's eyes filled, but this time she did not cry. She only nodded and held Emma's hand a moment longer before letting go. When Emma stepped back out onto the main floor, Adrian was speaking with the city inspector near the front entrance. The inspector held a hard hat under one arm, and kept glancing at Adrian with the expression of a man trying to remember whether respect and caution were the same thing. Evelyn was on another call already halfway into the next problem. Emma moved toward the bar on instinct and stopped when she saw the old service station where she used to stack trays. Her hands remembered the motions before her mind did. Napkins folded under glass. Garnish bins. Ticket printer. Smile. Pivot. Smile again. Keep moving. Ignore the hand on your wrist. Ignore the comment from booth 3. Ignore the look from the stairs. Nothing remained there now but bare counter and screw holes where the rack used to be. She set her palm flat against the wood once, then lifted it away. Do you want to go upstairs before they finish? Adrian asked behind her. She turned, no. He nodded as if that was the only answer he expected. By mid-afternoon, Raphael drove her to Lincoln Park. The building was old brick softened by ivy and recent money. Not flashy. Quiet. A narrow lobby with dark tile brass mailboxes and one potted plant that looked too healthy to belong to anyone careless. The locksmith was already waiting. He changed the deadbolt in front of her, handed her 2 keys, and left with professional indifference. The apartment sat on the 3rd floor. When Emma stepped inside, she forgot to breathe. It was not huge. That was the first mercy. Huge spaces demanded things. This one offered them. 1 bedroom, real kitchen. Windows that faced a street lined with trees just beginning to green at the edges. Light wood floors. A couch. A table for 2. A bookshelf half filled with nothing which felt more generous than if someone had tried to decorate her into gratitude. No music through the walls. No voices in the hall. No door at the top of the stairs that required a manager's permission to unlock. She walked from room to room, slowly touching almost nothing. The bedroom held a made bed and a plain dresser. The bathroom smelled faintly of soap and clean tile. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen like any ordinary appliance in any ordinary home, and the ordinariness of that sound nearly undid her. Raphael set the 2 recovered boxes by the entry and left her there with the keys in her palm. The silence after the door shut was complete. Emma stood in the middle of the living room for a long time. Then she opened the first box. Most of the clothes were there. Not folded, just shoved in. Her old blanket. 2 paperback novels swollen slightly from damp. The chipped mug wrapped in a towel. Toiletries. A cheap framed photo of her and her younger brother sitting on a stoop in St. Louis 5 years ago, both of them thinner and grinning, like rent had never existed. In the second box, she found her speaker, 1 broken sandal, a winter scarf, and the shoebox Evelyn had mentioned. Inside were photographs. Receipts. A letter from her brother. A ticket stub from a movie she barely remembered seeing. Small proof of continuity. Fragments of a life that had not been as easy to erase as Victor thought. She sat on the floor with the shoebox beside her and cried for the first time since the alley. Not because Halcyon was gone, because she had somewhere to cry now. The phone call from the therapist came just after 6. The woman introduced herself as Dr. Hart. Her voice was warm without being soft around the edges. She explained that Adrian's office had arranged for trauma counseling, but that the choice remained entirely Emma's. Emma sat on the floor in the middle of the living room back against the couch, the shoebox open beside her. Through the window, the late afternoon light had turned gold. "Do I have to decide now?" she asked. "No," Dr. Hart said. "But I have an opening tomorrow at 2 if you want it." Emma thought about the 2nd floor of Halcyon, about sleeping in the hotel and jerking awake because a door closed in the hallway, about Lily asking if impossible counted, about Adrian saying restitution should resemble what was taken. "Yes," she said, "tomorrow works." After the call, she ordered takeout because the refrigerator was empty, and she had no desire to test herself against a grocery store under fluorescent lights just yet. She ate half the soup at the kitchen counter and left the spoon in the bowl. At some point, she realized she was listening for footsteps outside the apartment door. There were none. That first night in Lincoln Park, sleep did not come easily. But when it came, it stayed. Days moved strangely after that, both slower and faster than before. Evelyn called with updates she delivered in crisp, efficient pieces. Victor had made statements. None helped him. Pierce had surfaced through a chain of shell accounts and one frightened assistant who preferred cooperation to loyalty. 3 more locations were under investigation. The women from Halcyon had been placed in hotel shelters or temporary apartments depending on what they needed and what they wanted. Lily had agreed to long-term counseling. Sophie was speaking with Immigration Counsel. Tessa came in and gave a statement that made even Evelyn pause before continuing. Dr. Hart's office smelled like cedar and tea. Emma sat on a couch with a knitted pillow at her back and answered questions she did not know how to answer yet. About shame, about survival, about why women were always expected to recognize danger in time to deserve sympathy, about the difference between choice and adaptation, about the way a room with a lock could feel like freedom until you realized who held the building. She left each session tired in a new way, not emptied, unpacked. One afternoon, about a week after the raid, Emma found herself walking past the old block where Halcyon used to glow. She had not meant to. Her feet simply took the turn. The building was wrapped in scaffolding now. The awnings were gone. The front windows had been replaced with plywood painted clean white. Men in work clothes moved in and out carrying drywall and electrical cable. The old sign was nowhere. In its place, bolted above the entrance in temporary lettering, was a new one. Moretti Community Resource Center. Job placement. Legal aid. Counseling. Emergency housing. Emma stood on the sidewalk and stared until a cab honked behind her and made her step back from the curb. She pulled out her phone before she had fully decided to. Adrian answered on the second ring. Yes, it should not have felt intimate, that one word, but it did. Not because of what it was, because of how quickly he gave it. Emma looked up at the sign again. You turned it into a resource center. A pause. Then you saw it. I'm standing outside. And you did it fast. Some things improve with hesitation. Demolition doesn't. She smiled despite herself, then lost the smile just as quickly when she thought of the second floor. Why this? Because the building is already paid for. Because the neighborhood needs it. Because I'm tired of profitable things pretending they are useful. Traffic moved around her. A bus sighed to a stop down the block. Somewhere overhead, a drill whined from the scaffolding. Emma kept looking at the sign. Job placement, legal aid, counseling, emergency housing. The words felt impossible for a place that had once lived on the exact absence of them. You know, that sounds unreal, she said. I'm aware. And people are going to say you're laundering guilt. That would at least be a more interesting rumor than half the others. She let out a breath that almost became laughter. On the line, Adrian said nothing more. He left space the way he always did when something mattered. Finally, Emma asked, "Why am I calling you?" This time his pause lasted longer. "Maybe because you know what the building used to be," he said. "And maybe because I want someone in it who won't let people like Victor grow in the corners while everyone else enjoys the lighting." Emma turned away from the street and leaned against the neighboring brick wall. That sounds like a job offer. It is not polished enough to be one. What is it then? An invitation to look at the plans before I hand the place to someone who has never had to choose between safety and rent. The city moved around her. Car doors, wind, the metallic clatter of construction, a child laughing somewhere beyond the block. Ordinary life, completely indifferent to the fact that 7 nights earlier she had walked out of this same building with nowhere to go and a bag that smelled like smoke. Adrian. Yes, I don't know how to build a center. No, he said. But you know what people need the first 10 minutes after they realize they are not trapped anymore. That is rarer. Emma closed her eyes. When she opened them again, the sign was still there. White letters against fresh plywood. A new name on an old wound. "Let me see the plans," she said. "All right." No triumph in his voice, no pressure, just assent. They met 2 days later in the half-finished shell of what had once been the VIP lounge. Evelyn was there with blueprints, and so was a social worker from the West Side and a woman who ran a shelter in Pilsen. They spread plans across a folding table where champagne buckets used to sit. Emma pointed to the front desk and said it should not look like a reception barrier. She pointed to the counseling rooms and said the doors needed frosted glass panels so nobody felt locked in. She pointed to the waiting area and said there should be charging stations, bathrooms people could find without asking, and a place to leave wet shoes in winter. The social worker looked at her once and nodded slowly, as if recognizing expertise wearing a face no one had taught to call itself that. Adrian mostly listened. When he did speak, it was rarely about appearances. More exits. Better lighting in the side corridor. No blind spots near the rear entrance. No private office with only one door. No staff housing on site tied to employment. Any emergency beds would be managed through partner organizations with independent oversight. At one point, Emma glanced up and found him watching her instead of the plans. "Why are you looking at me like that?" He answered without hesitation. "Because you are already doing the work." She looked back down before the warmth in her face could become obvious. By the time evening settled over the scaffolding outside, they had revised the intake area, expanded the legal room, and moved the kitchen to a brighter corner. The old building no longer felt haunted. Not exactly. It felt busy with replacement. When Emma finally stepped back out onto the sidewalk, the air had turned cool. Adrian came with her as far as the curb. Neither of them seemed in a hurry to say goodbye. "You look less tired," he said. "So do you." "That is not true." "Maybe not." A car rolled slowly past. The last crew from inside shouted something to one another over the sound of a reversing truck. Above them, plastic sheeting snapped once in the wind. Emma tucked her hands into the pockets of her coat. "Lily started job training this week." "I know." "Sophie got her documents back." "I know." "Tessa is still angry." He looked at her then, a faint shadow of something in his eyes that might have been humor if it belonged to anyone else. "Good." She smiled. This time it stayed. For a moment, the city around them softened. Not because it had changed. Because she had. A week earlier, she had been in the rain with a soaked apron tied at her waist and nowhere to sleep. Now, she had keys in her bag, a therapist's card in her wallet, groceries in her kitchen, and plans for a place that might keep someone else from walking alone into the dark because rent had become leverage. Adrian reached for the passenger side door of the car waiting at the curb, then stopped and looked back at her. "Are you coming tomorrow?" he asked. Emma looked up at the skeleton of the old club, the fresh sign the windows that would soon stop reflecting what the building had been and start showing what it was becoming. "Yes," she said. He nodded once. "Good." The door closed behind him. The car pulled away. Emma stayed where she was a little longer, listening to the city and the construction and her own breathing. Then she turned toward home. The sidewalk was dry. The evening wind smelled faintly of paint and spring. Somewhere behind her in the building that had once been halcyon hammers and voices continued into the dark, changing the shape of the rooms. This time, when a man had asked what happened, she had answered, and the world had not looked away.